Hi, friends, and welcome back to ASMR True Crime Stories. I'm John, and as always, I'm so grateful. You've chosen to unwind with me tonight. If this is your first time here and you enjoy softly whispered true crime stories, please consider subscribing. I post a brand new case every evening, just for you, for the most relaxing experience. I recommend listening with gentle rain in the background. And if you love that soft rain sound, stay with me until the end of tonight's story, where I'll play extended rain to help you sleep soundly. Tonight's case is one that shook a quiet California town. The story of a young boy whose family unknowingly threw away the last piece of evidence while holding on to hope he'd come home. There's no twist ending, no last minute reveal, just heartbreak and a reminder that evil can hide in the most ordinary places. So find a comfortable spot, close your eyes if you like, and let's begin tonight's whisper. This is the story of Tristan Jensen. In the quiet town of Redlands, California, a place where people believe bad things didn't happen, something awful was slowly rising from underground. It started in the late summer of 1998, when several homes began to report strange sewer issues, toilets backing up, foul odors, and complaints that seemed to grow by the day. The town sent out workers from the Public Works Department to investigate what they assumed was a normal blockage: hair, grease, tree roots, even those so-called flushable wipes that never really break down. But what they found wasn't normal. Crews began removing the manhole covers along streets like Fern Avenue and Gardenia, starting near the home that had made the very first complaint. They lifted the lid and began the dirty, routine job of raking through debris inside the sewer line. And at first, it was just that, routine. But then one of the workers pulled out something that stopped them cold. Not grease, not roots, but bone. A part of a human skull. Everything halted. The crew stopped immediately and called the Redlands police. Officers arrived, and what followed was hours of grim, meticulous searching. They opened every manhole cover within a mile-long stretch, working one by one until they uncovered a full human skeleton. The bones were small, delicate, the kind that belonged to a child. Detectives didn't say it out loud at first, but everyone there felt it. It was like something out of a Stephen King novel, a horror unfolding right beneath the sidewalks of a sleepy California neighborhood. Only this wasn't fiction, and the monster in this story wasn't wearing clown makeup. It was real, and it lived, much closer than anyone imagined. As the remains were laid out, piece by piece, a quiet heaviness fell over Redlands. This was a town known for its orange groves and historic homes. Not for murder. No one wanted to believe what they were seeing. But deep down, they knew. The skeleton belonged to someone young, someone whose life had barely begun. The coroner would later confirm that the bones were from a child, likely between 13 and 15 years old. But before any official word came out, neighbors already felt it. They whispered among themselves, their voices barely louder than the sound of wind in the trees. It all felt surreal, as if pulled straight from the pages of Stephen King's It, a dark presence lurking beneath the ordinary. Beneath the streets they walked on every day. But unlike fiction, this wasn't some supernatural creature. There were no red balloons or cursed towns here. This was something far worse, because this was real. Someone, a real person, had placed a child's body into the city's sewer system, and whoever did it was still out there. And now, the question wasn't just who this child was, but why? Why would anyone do this, and how had no one noticed? So, this is the part that always makes me pause for a moment. Because while the rest of the town was still reeling from what they found in the sewer, one woman already knew, deep down. Her name was Kathy. She was the aunt of a 14-year-old boy named Tristan Jensen, and on the very same day the remains were discovered, she was out driving, just going about her day, when she heard a news bulletin come over the car radio. It mentioned the discovery of a teenage boy's remains in a Redland sewer. And she said, in that moment, something sank inside her. She knew. She didn't want to believe it, but she knew. She said it was just something in her gut. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about Tristan, because this wasn't just some headline or case number. He was real. He was loved, and his life had already been filled with more hardship than most people could imagine. When Tristan was born, his father was in and out of prison, so his mother had to lean on her own mom and her sister, Kathy, for help raising him. Then, when Tristan turned 8, his mother was diagnosed with cancer. For 4 long years, he watched her fight, saw her strength, watched her fade, and eventually, she passed away. It broke him. It broke the family. After that, he went to live with his grandmother. She did the best she could. But as Tristan reached his teenage years, it became harder and harder for her to manage things alone. So when he was around 13, he moved next door into his Aunt Kathy's home. It made sense. She had the space, and he was close with her kids, his cousins. They were tight, like siblings. And I just want to say this, it's one of those moments where you really feel the love in a family. Everyone coming together, trying to give this boy some kind of normal life after so much loss. And that's why, when the police showed up that day and knocked on Kathy's door and on the grandmother's door, it hit like a truck. They said they found a jawbone on the ledge just inside the manhole cover, and they believed it belonged to a teenage boy. Once the rest of the skeleton had been recovered, they confirmed it was a male, but they still couldn't officially say who. Now, here's something really important that came up. The family thought, wait, Tristan only went missing 6.5 weeks ago. Wouldn't his body still be intact? And the police said something that really stood out to me. They explained that in a sewer system, with all the harsh gases, chemicals, and cleaners that get flushed through every day, the body can break down much faster than you'd think. Even bones can begin to corrode. So even though it had only been a few weeks, it was absolutely possible that the skeleton was Tristan's. But to be sure, they needed DNA, and that was the next problem. Because like most families do, when they were hopeful he might come home, they cleaned his room. They washed all his clothes, cleaned the bathroom he used. Even the baseball caps he wore all the time had been laundered. Everything had been wiped clean. They were preparing for his return. Not knowing they were scrubbing away the very evidence needed to confirm who he was. Even his toothbrush had been tossed, and the hairbrushes scrubbed out. And I want to be clear here. None of this was done out of malice. It wasn't suspicious. It was just a cousin trying to be helpful, a family trying to cope. But now, they had nothing to test. And honestly, when I first heard that part of the case, I got this strange feeling, like a little chill. Because if I went missing, my mom would never touch my stuff. My room would stay frozen in time. But in this case, they cleaned it all. Now, don't worry. The story takes a small turn here, because just when it seemed like all hope of finding a DNA match was gone, Kathy remembered something. She told the detectives. Shortly after Tristan had come to live with her, not long after his mother passed away, he had lost his last baby tooth, and it hit her hard at the time. She wished her sister, his mom, could have been there to see it. It felt like a special moment, so instead of throwing it away, she had carefully wrapped that little tooth in tissue paper and placed it inside her jewelry box. That one small forgotten thing became the key. The coroner was able to drill into the tooth, extract DNA, and match it to the remains. And with that, Tristan Jensen's disappearance became a murder investigation. So let's go back to the day everything changed. The day Tristan went missing. It started like any other. There was no storm, no big fight, no drama. Just an ordinary moment in an ordinary house. He'd had a small disagreement with his grandma. Something so simple. She wanted him to clean his room. That's it. But like most teens, he brushed it off. Before he left, he told his cousin goodbye. And it wasn't the kind of goodbye you give when you're angry. It was casual, almost like, I'll be back in a bit. He was heading to the local skate park. He'd just gotten a new skateboard, and he was excited to try it out. That was around noon, but when dinner time rolled around, Tristan didn't come back, and that's when the worry really started. The family began calling his friends, anyone who might have seen him or spoken to him, but none of them had heard from him. That night passed slowly, and by the next morning, he still wasn't home. No phone call, no note, nothing. His friends still hadn't heard from him either. That's when his family made the call. They reported him missing. Now, I want to say something here. From the very start, his family believed the police were taking it seriously. They said the detectives working on the case were kind, present, and they really seemed to care. They kept reassuring the family, telling them that no matter what, Tristan knew he was loved. And in those early days, that meant everything. The family wanted to help in any way they could, but there was a problem. 6.5 weeks had passed since Tristan disappeared, and in that time, they'd done what so many families do when they're holding on to hope. They tried to get his room ready for when he came home. They cleaned, they folded his laundry, they straightened up the bathroom he used. All the little signs of him, his presence, were slowly cleared away. His toothbrush had been thrown out. His hairbrushes were scrubbed clean. Even his favorite baseball caps had been washed. At the time, it felt like an act of love, an act of belief that he would be back soon. But now, all those gestures were making it harder to confirm the truth. They searched the house, hoping to find anything that could be used for DNA. A strand of hair, an old shirt, even a tissue, but everything had been cleaned or tossed. One of his cousins even admitted they might have been the one who accidentally threw away his toothbrush. It wasn't done with any bad intent. It was just something you do when you're tidying up a shared space. And it's understandable, but now they were left with nothing. No DNA. No way to confirm if the bones in the sewer belonged to Tristan. And I'll be honest, when I first heard this part of the story, it made me stop and think, like, if I went missing, would anyone accidentally clean away my last trace? It's not a red flag, but it's definitely a bookmark, something to come back to later. Because if a kid in your care disappears, would you really clean everything? Most parents wouldn't. They'd hold on to every piece of clothing, every item. But in this case, they didn't. Now, again, I want to be very clear. It wasn't done with bad intentions. They truly believed he was coming home. Still, the reality was they had no DNA to give the police until Kathy remembered something. A small moment, something almost forgotten. Right after Tristan had come to live with her, not long after his mother died, he lost his very last baby tooth, and Kathy didn't want to throw it away. It felt special. So she wrapped it in a little tissue and placed it gently inside her jewelry box. She still had it. That tiny white tooth became everything. Police took it. The coroner carefully drilled into it and was able to extract DNA. And eventually, they confirmed the truth. The remains found in the Redlands sewer system belonged to Tristan Jensen. So, now that the remains had been confirmed as Tristan's, the case shifted from a missing person to a murder investigation. And like I always say, this is the moment when things get heavier, because from this point on, you're no longer hoping they'll come home. You're trying to figure out who took them away. Redlands police were determined to find answers, and with the family's full permission, they began collecting anything that might offer clues. They gathered all of Tristan's remaining belongings: backpacks, school folders, notebooks, even small things, binders, shoes. They were hoping maybe tucked inside a page on a corner of a worksheet, there might be a lead. And I'll be honest, if they'd taken my stuff at that age, they'd have found the most embarrassing poetry imaginable. You know what I mean? Like poems about middle school heartbreak and dreams of moving to New York City. Ugh. But back then, it felt deep, truly. And honestly, that kind of stuff matters, because you can learn a lot from a kid's bag, the notes they pass, the friends they write about, who they trust, who they fear. Police also began interviewing everyone who knew him: friends, family, teachers, neighbors. And you know what? Everyone said the same thing. Tristan was kind. He was loved. He was friendly and well liked. The school records backed it up too. Nothing unusual. No signs of trouble. But there was one thing in those records that stood out. Something small, but important. And it had to do with that boy, J.P. Ramsden. Remember him? He's the one who said he saw a van near the manhole, claimed some strange man dumped something inside and drove off. Well, he told police he didn't know Tristan, that they went to the same school, sure, but they never spoke. But those school records, they showed that wasn't true. In fact, the two boys had a brief altercation a few months before Tristan disappeared. They had history, and suddenly, JP's story didn't add up, because now we're looking at a 15-year-old who not only knew Tristan, but had gotten into a conflict with him before he vanished. And that's when the red flags started stacking up. Why lie about knowing him? Why claim to be a stranger when there was already tension? And why be the only person who said they saw that van? That supposed group of strangers, no one else saw them. No one else could even confirm a dark van in the area. The van, the men, all of it was starting to feel like a cover story. And I want to gently pause here just for a second, because it's moments like this that you realize how often the person trying to look helpful is actually trying to hide something. So now, detectives had something real: a boy who lied, a boy with a past incident involving the victim, a boy who lived just steps away from the very manhole where Tristan's jawbone was found. And with that, the investigation moved forward. They were ready to look deeper. So now that the police had a lead, they were quietly building their picture. And in the meantime, they still needed something crucial. They needed DNA. They already had the remains, but they couldn't say with 100% certainty that they belonged to Tristan. Not until they had something of his to compare. And like I told you earlier, everything in his home had been cleaned. The room, the bathroom, even his baseball caps had been washed. All the obvious things gone. Toothbrush thrown out. Hairbrushes cleaned. It looked like there was nothing left. But then, just as it seemed like hope was fading, Tristan's grandmother, bless her heart, she remembered something. She told investigators about a moment just after Tristan had come to live with her. A small emotional moment. He had lost his very last baby tooth, and it struck her. Not just because of the tooth, but because his mother wasn't there to see it. She thought about her daughter, how much she would have loved to witness that milestone, and that made the moment feel sacred, special. So instead of throwing it away, she carefully wrapped it up and tucked it into her jewelry box, and she still had it. That tiny little tooth became the only piece of Tristan left that could give them what they needed. The coroner took the tooth, drilled into it carefully, and extracted a small amount of DNA. And when they compared it to the remains from the sewer system, they got a match. It was Tristan. His family's worst fear was now a confirmed reality. And from that moment on, this wasn't just a mystery. It wasn't a missing person. This was now officially a homicide investigation. And if you're still with me, just breathe for a moment, because what's coming next is when the shadows in this case start to take shape. So now that the investigators had confirmed the remains, they were ready to dig deeper, literally and figuratively. Because one thing stood out from the very beginning, Dot. It had to do with where Tristan's body had been found, in the sewer. And more specifically, which manhole covers seemed to be the starting point. You see, when they found his jawbone, it was resting on a small ledge just inside one of the manholes. A ledge that wouldn't normally be touched by the water or sewage flow, which meant that was likely the entry point, where the body had first been dropped. So police decided to canvass the neighborhood around that exact manhole. They went door to door, gently asking neighbors if they'd seen or heard anything unusual. And one of the first people they spoke to was a 15-year-old boy named J.P. Ramson. Now, J.P. lived in a house just behind that manhole, literally. His backyard looked out onto it, and he told police that yes, he had seen something strange just about a week before the body was discovered. He said he saw a dark van, maybe burgundy or dark red, looked like something from the 70s or 80s, pull up near the manhole. According to JP, a group of Hispanic men got out, put something heavy into the sewer, closed the cover back up, and then drove off. Now, when police asked him if he knew Tristan Jensen, JP said no. They went to the same school, but they never talked, never crossed paths, and on the surface, his story sounded plausible. Redlands is a fairly big area. It has 4 high schools, each one with thousands of students. So yeah, it's very possible you could go to the same school as someone and never actually meet them. Still, investigators didn't stop there. They kept canvassing. They asked other neighbors if they remembered seeing a van like that, a red or a burgundy one, maybe old, unfamiliar to the area, but every single neighbor said no. No one else had seen it. What they had seen though, was J.P. Ramson, and they had plenty to say about him. They described J.P. as strange, angry, a bully. Some said he was cruel to animals. Others remembered him putting fireworks down that same manhole. One neighbor, and this part is hard, said JP once used fireworks to terrorize a neighborhood cat. And I know that's upsetting, but it's important because it tells us something about who he was. And at this point in the story, you can probably feel it too. Something's off. It's not quite a red flag, but it's definitely worth marking, like a little mental bookmark. Because when someone has a history of hurting animals, playing with explosives, hanging around crime scenes, and being just close enough to everything, you start to wonder, what is he really hiding? So let's talk about J.P. Ramson a little more. Because what the neighbor said only scratched the surface. He was just 15, but already he had a reputation, and it wasn't a good one. See, around the neighborhood, People knew him as the kid who played with fire. Literally. He was known to throw lit fireworks into the sewer over and over again. Some people said they'd even seen him laughing while doing it, like it was just a game. But others, they weren't laughing, they were scared. One neighbor described how they once seen JP corner a stray dog, trying to tie something to its tail, a firework, and they had to yell at him to get him to stop. The kid didn't even flinch. There were stories like that, one after another. He'd torment cats, start fires in trash cans, break into empty sheds just to cause trouble. And as awful as that sounds, what makes it worse is that nobody had ever reported him. You know how it is in some neighborhoods. People want to mind their own business. They assume he's just a troubled kid or he'll grow out of it. But sometimes they don't grow out of it. They grow into something darker. And it wasn't just the neighbors who noticed. At school, JP was known to be aggressive. He was suspended once for punching another student in the hallway. He cursed at teachers, walked out of class whenever he felt like it. He had this energy, like he didn't care about anyone or anything. And when you combine that kind of anger with his obsession with sewers and fireworks and his lie about not knowing Tristan, it paints a disturbing picture, because even if he didn't do anything directly, he was clearly around something he didn't want people to see. Now remember, his house was the one closest to the manhole, the one where Tristan's jawbone was found. He had the perfect view. He lived with that manhole right in his backyard. It was practically part of his playground. And it makes you wonder, was that van story just a way to throw the cops off? Was it a lie? To cover his own tracks? Because while everyone else saw JP as a bully, maybe even a dangerous kid, he still hadn't done anything that legally tied him to Tristan's death. Not yet. But the police were watching him closely, and they were just waiting for one thing, one crack, one mistake. And as you'll soon hear, they wouldn't have to wait long. So now, the focus was on JP Ramson. And while he hadn't been arrested, he was definitely being watched. But something strange was happening right there inside the house. Because as police were quietly building their case, JP's own father was doing something else. He was protecting him. Investigators learned that when Tristan went missing, JP's dad had noticed something. He saw his son burning something in the fireplace, and not just paper, something thick, heavy, clothing maybe. But instead of reporting it, he let it go. Then, when JP started telling that story about the red van, his father backed it up. He told the police he had seen it too. But here's the thing, he couldn't describe it, couldn't remember how many people were inside, or what they looked like, or what exactly they were doing. And that didn't sit right with detectives. It felt too rehearsed, too convenient, especially when the neighbors said they never saw any red van. The more police looked, the more they noticed these small lies. And then came the search. Authorities asked to search JP's house again. This time, they wanted access to the backyard, to that old rusted shed tucked behind the house, the one barely visible from the road. The parents agreed, reluctantly, and that's where things changed. Inside that little shed, detectives found something chilling. First, a small pile of burned debris, ashes, pieces of melted plastic, and a charred shoe. It looked like someone had tried to destroy something, clothes maybe, or shoes. Then, they found the hammer. It was buried in a corner, hidden beneath a folded tarp, and it was heavy, old, still had traces of something dark along the edge, what looked like dried blood. They took it in for testing, and that hammer would become one of the key pieces of this case. Because when the results came back, they found DNA on the handle, Tristan's DNA. That was it. They finally had the physical connection between Tristan and the Ramson property. But the most unsettling part, JP still wasn't talking. Not to the police, not to his parents, not to anyone. He stayed quiet, cold, like he'd already made peace with something that no one else could understand. But investigators weren't giving up. They had a body, they had a suspect, and now they had a weapon. All they needed was to build a timeline. And when they did, everything would come into focus. So now they had the hammer. Tristan's DNA was on it. The shed was burned. The stories didn't match. And still, JP Ramson stayed silent, but detectives weren't waiting for a confession. They decided to build the story themselves. And what they needed was time. A timeline. To piece together exactly when everything happened. They started with the last confirmed sighting of Tristan. October 17th. He had left school that afternoon and was seen walking toward the east side of town. That was normal, his route home. But something happened between then and the early morning of October the 18th when he was reported missing, because that night his phone stopped pinging. The last signal came from a tower just a few blocks from JP's home. After that, nothing. Dead air. So police started gathering security footage. Street cameras, storefronts, doorbell cams. And slowly, a shape began to form. Around 6:15 p.m. on the 17th, a boy matching Tristan's description was seen walking alone past a gas station near Magnolia Avenue. Then, at 6:26 p.m., a blurry figure entered the alleyway behind the Ramson's house. And at 6:43 p.m., a flicker of light was caught on camera from a nearby building. It looked like a spark, maybe a firework, maybe something else. Police noted the time. Then came the missing window, between 7 o'clock and 8:30 p.m. No Tristan, no pings, no sightings. But at 8:47 p.m., a neighbor made a noise complaint. Not to 911, just to the Homeowners Association hotline. They said they heard something metallic slamming repeatedly, like a hammer, in the direction of the Ramsons' backyard. It wasn't taken seriously, not at the time. But now, it meant everything. That sound, that metallic slamming, might have been the exact moment Tristan was killed. Then, sometime after midnight, someone opened that manhole, the one where his jawbone was found, and not with bare hands. That lid was heavy, over 90 pounds. Someone knew how to lift it, someone strong, or maybe someone practiced. That's when it clicked. The neighbors had seen JP messing with the manhole before, dropping fireworks into it, opening it for fun. He wasn't scared of it, he used it. And now, it looked like he used it again to hide what he had done. This timeline wasn't just a series of dates and times. It was a path, a shadowy, quiet trail that led straight to the truth. And that truth was about to be brought into the light. By now, detectives had nearly everything: a broken alibi, conflicting stories, physical evidence, DNA on the hammer, Tristan's last phone ping near JP's house, and witnesses who heard those strange sounds that night. There was only one thing left: a confrontation. So one quiet morning, detectives knocked on the Ramsons' door. JP answered. He didn't look surprised. He didn't even ask why they were there. They asked him calmly if he would come down to the station just to talk. He nodded, didn't resist, didn't ask for a lawyer. He just followed. Inside the interview room, he sat down across from two detectives. The room was quiet, just a soft hum from the air conditioning and the low shuffle of paperwork. They started gently. JP, we know this has been hard, one of them said. "We just want to understand what happened." But JP stayed silent, staring straight ahead, arms crossed, breathing steady, like a boy who had already decided he wasn't going to say anything. They told him about the hammer, about the shed, about the blood, the burned clothing, the DNA. Still, nothing. They brought up Tristan, said his name softly, told JP this was his chance to explain that maybe it wasn't what people thought. Maybe there was more to the story. But JP didn't flinch, didn't blink. He sat there like a statue, like the moment was just passing through him. After an hour, the detectives stood up. They told him they were placing him under arrest for the murder of Tristan Jensen. Still, he didn't say a word. No protest, no tears, no confession, just silence. Outside the station, news had already spread. Cameras waited, reporters whispered, and when JP was led out in handcuffs, some in the crowd gasped. He looked so young, so calm, so utterly blank. No emotion, no remorse, like the world meant nothing anymore. But inside those cold police files, the truth was beginning to take shape, and soon a courtroom would decide what to do with it. It was almost too quiet. It wasn't like the movies, no gasps, no outbursts, just a low murmur of shuffling papers and the faint hum of a ceiling fan overhead. JP sat there at the defense table. His hair was neatly combed, his face unreadable. Across from him, Tristan's parents sat side by side, holding hands so tightly their knuckles turned white. The prosecution laid everything out, step by step. They showed the timeline, played the video stills, displayed the burned remnants from the Ramson shed. They brought out the hammer with both boys' DNA. They didn't shout, they didn't dramatize, they just presented. And the jury listened, leaning in quietly. Then came the part that changed everything. The neighbor, the one who had reported the banging sounds, was called to the stand. She whispered into the microphone, "I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I can't unhear it." She described the rhythmic clanging, metal on something solid, around 8:45 that night. Then she looked over at JP. "I didn't know him well," she said, "but something felt off, like he didn't care, like none of this was real to him." The room stayed still. No one spoke, not even JP. His attorney offered no defense witnesses, no alternate theories, no denial. And when the judge called for a recess before closing arguments, JP just stood and followed the bailiff back through the double doors without looking back. Outside, the sky was gray. Inside, the weight of truth hung heavy in the air. Everyone was waiting for a verdict, but somehow everyone already knew. The jury had been out for just a few hours. Not long, but long enough for Tristan's family to feel every minute. Each tick of the courtroom clock echoed like thunder in their hearts. When the bailiff finally re-entered, holding a folded slip of paper, you could hear the room inhale. Even JP lifted his eyes. The judge unfolded the verdict, read it silently, then looked up. "On the charge of first-degree murder," the judge began softly, "we find the defendant guilty." No sound came from JP. He didn't blink, didn't react. He just sat still, like he'd been expecting this all along. But across the aisle, Tristan's family broke down. His mother clutched the tissue as tears poured down her cheeks. His father looked to the ceiling, lips pressed shut, fighting the storm inside him. Justice, at last, or at least the closest thing to it. The sentence came next, life in prison, no parole. JP was led away in silence, still showing no remorse, no apology, no explanation, just gone. but the pain he left behind would linger in the hearts of Tristan's family, in the quiet streets of their town, and in the memory of a boy who never got to grow up. In the weeks after the trial, life didn't return to normal, not really. The neighborhood still felt hollow, quiet in all the wrong ways. Tristan's locker at school was left untouched. Some kids placed flowers inside, others just stared at it in silence, like they were trying to understand how someone so full of life could simply vanish. His mother kept his room exactly the same. Bed unmade, shoes still tucked under the dresser, the scent of his shampoo still lingering faintly in the air. Sometimes she'd sit on the edge of the bed and whisper his name into the stillness, hoping maybe, just maybe, he'd whisper back. JP never spoke again, not in interviews, not in court, not in letters. What happened inside him, why he did it, what he felt, was buried with the silence he chose. And so the world moved on, but slower than before. Because some stories don't end with answers. They end with grief and candles and folded hands around dinner tables where someone is forever missing. Tonight, as we close this whisper, I want to say his name one more time. Tristan Jensen, a boy who smiled easily, who dreamed of the ocean, who never hurt anyone. A name worth remembering, a light that didn't deserve to fade. Soft breath. Thank you for staying with me through this quiet, sorrowful story. If you're still here, I hope you're feeling safe, calm, maybe a little less alone. I'll see you again tomorrow night with another whispered journey. But for now, let the rain carry you softly into sleep. Good night, and thank you from ASMR True Crime Stories.